One day, Professor James Magoo of the University of California received a letter. It said, "I don't know how to explain this, but since I was 11 years old, I have remembered every single day of my life, every single thing I've done. Pick any date and year, and I can tell you in the smallest detail what I did that day, who I met, and where I went, without hesitation. At the same time, I won't use anything except my memory." This letter to the doctor was written by Jill Price. Her super abilities were confirmed, scientists became interested in the case, and this incredible pathology began to be studied. What secrets does our memory hide? What happened to the people who lost it forever and don't remember anything about their lives? Is the woman who can't forget happy, or do her memories prevent her from living? Who has the best memory on the planet? And what fantastic amounts of data can people hold in their heads? And in what specific corner of the brain, on which shelf, are our memories stored? Be sure to watch this video until the end, it will be interesting. If you asked Jill Price to remember any day from her life, she would give such an accurate answer that you would be amazed. What would you do? August 29, 1980 was a Friday, and I went to Palm Springs for the weekend with my friends Nina and Michelle and their family. Price: You were 14 years and 8 months old when you drove for the third time. January 10, 1981, Saturday. During a driving school lesson. She was 15 years old then. Now she is 56. Jill Price is the first person in the world to be diagnosed with highly superior autobiographical memory syndrome. People with this ability can instantly recall exactly what they were doing, what they were wearing, and where they were. At any point in their lives, they are able to recall in detail both public news and personal events, with an accuracy more typical of a constantly running recording. They said it became quite empty, but instead of the sun, a loud release strictly began. Reflections on the right screen appear chaotically, and anything can trigger the appearance of a specific event from the past there. Of course, the gift of astonishing autobiographical memory turned out to be a heavy burden as well. Here's what the woman herself says about it. "It's endless, uncontrollable, and exhausting. My brain relives my entire past life every day, and it's driving me crazy." Professor Magoo, whom the woman consulted, is an outstanding specialist in memory research. He assembled a huge team whose goal was to determine the extent of Jill's abilities and find out the reason for her pathological memory of life events. Neuropsychologists tested the patient's ability to learn and remember, while neurobiologists analyzed the results. Over 5 years, Price managed to undergo numerous tests on memory, intelligence, and learning ability. Researchers found a brain pathology in Jill. Her temporal lobe and caudate nucleus are enlarged. Despite her phenomenal memory ability, the woman continues to live like an ordinary person. She wrote an autobiographical book and works at a religious school. Price is not the only one who has been found to have such a condition. Another woman diagnosed with a similar condition, Rebecca Sherrick, says that her brain is cluttered, and constantly reliving certain moments from the past leads to regular headaches and insomnia. Scientists are sure that forgetting facts and any kind of information is natural for humans, and often even vital. The brain needs to free itself from the burden of impressions and information. When a person is healthy, memory seems to regulate the load on its own and prepares to receive new information. At the same time, old data doesn't disappear without a trace, but moves from active memory to passive memory, from where it can sometimes be retrieved. This property of memory saves people in critical situations. The possibilities of memorization seem limitless. It has been estimated that an adult can remember from 20 to 100,000 words, but these are ordinary people. And there are also those who have phenomenal memory. For example, Alexander the Great remembered the names of tens of thousands of his warriors and knew all of them by face. Academician Abram Iofa could recite the entire table of logarithms by heart, and Mozart only needed to hear a huge musical piece once to be able to perform it and write it down on paper afterward. Chess player Alexander Alekhine played blindfolded by memory against 30 to 40 opponents and almost always won. Inventor Nikola Tesla had a unique photographic memory. He only needed to look at a page once to remember its contents forever. Nikola Tesla memorized entire books and could reproduce complex three-dimensional images in detail. And he could also recall any formula, equation, or value from a logarithm table from memory. The engineer also preferred to keep his drawings in his head. The famous mnemonist Solomon Cherysheevsky never wrote anything down, yet he could remember all phone numbers, names, surnames, addresses, and lists of tasks with absolute accuracy. The man could memorize thousands of unrelated words at once, long formulas, and even chains of phrases in an unfamiliar language. Forgetting, by the way, was very difficult for him. Cherysheevsky had to develop his own techniques to get rid of unnecessary data. He perceived information synesthetically, sensing the smell, taste, and color of words. They say that Solomon couldn't read while eating because it would interfere with the taste of his food. Biographers of Pablo Picasso claim that the artist had a special room where various things were kept. He would take an object in his hands and recall what was connected to it, and faces, events, thoughts, conversations, and dates would come to his mind. But Charlie Chaplin, who was also considered a genius, couldn't even remember the last name of his secretary, with whom he had worked for 7 years. According to scientists, a person's memory begins to function after just 20 weeks, and it's quite possible that some people can remember what happened to them in their mother's womb. By the way, under our episodes about past lives, there are quite a few comments like that, including memories of the first years and even the very first minutes of life. If you're interested, you can read more at the links. And although science believes that all of these are false memories that we've simply made up and attributed to ourselves, most likely, among you or your acquaintances, there are similar strange cases that don't fit into the standard ideas about the brain. One way or another, even without a scientific degree, it's clear that the quality of memory is influenced by many factors. Some people have a stronger visual memory, while others have a stronger auditory memory. The best memory performance appears in stressful situations, when even a person with an ordinary memory is able to retain the smallest details in their mind. For example, people who previously had difficulties learning foreign languages, when they find themselves in a stressful situation in a foreign country where survival is at stake, can easily remember a new language. Sometimes memory fails. Accidental injuries, chronic illnesses, tumors, infections, stress, and depression can completely erase a person's memory or partially damage it. The nature of amnesia is not fully understood. There are anomalies that cannot be explained, but we'll talk about that a bit later. Scientists from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, through experiments on rats, discovered that even animals with amnesia retain traces of past experiences in their brains. At the same time, it's surprising that dormant memories can be awakened. An interesting case of memory loss occurred on February 4, 1918, when a disoriented French soldier was found on the platform of the Brato railway station in the city of Lyon. He didn't have any identification with him, but he was able to give his name as Antelme Mangin. The bad news was that this was the only fact he could remember about himself. The man also couldn't explain how he ended up on the train platform. He was placed in a psychiatric hospital and for many years was transferred from one medical institution to another, as they tried to establish his identity. A photograph of the man was published in newspapers, and several dozen people claimed that he was a member of their family. Finally, in 1931, of the families identified Mangin as a former waiter with a completely different name, who went to fight in World War I but never returned. The family was able to provide the necessary proof. It turned out that in August 1914, the man was wounded, taken prisoner, and lost his memory due to a traumatic event during the fighting. So, if you don't remember your childhood memories, don't be upset. After all, it's nothing compared to the trials faced by people with severe forms of amnesia. For many of them, it's a real gaping abyss in their lives. After all, memories are the core of our personality, around which our entire identity, our relationships with people, our thoughts and emotions are built. And when we lose our memory, we essentially lose ourselves. For example, Susie McKinnon doesn't remember herself as a child. Moreover, she can't recall herself at any age except her current one, and she's about to turn 70. She also has problems with what scientists call memorable events. At the same time, scientists are absolutely sure that Susie does not suffer from amnesia. Her deviation from the norm is unique. When the woman underwent numerous tests, the specialists were shocked. It turned out that McKinnon completely lacks autobiographical memory. Ordinary people have the ability to mentally travel through time, returning to different events from the past whenever they want. For example, you can remember sitting at your desk in elementary school or lying on the beach by the sea, watching the waves. Amazingly, McKinnon is unable to do this. But in Susie's mind, bad memories also don't linger, such as tragic events related to the death of loved ones. Her brain simply erases all of the past without exception. And this is Kim Pick, a truly unique person. The diagnosis of autism, given to a child with an abnormally large head, cranial hernia, and cerebellar damage, turned out to be incorrect. After all, the superhuman ability to remember colossal amounts of information was combined with everyday difficulties that would seem wild to an ordinary person. Amazingly, he could freely read books from his parents' library at the age of 3, but he couldn't dress himself, wash up, or go to the bathroom on his own. Due to underdevelopment of the cerebellum, he had coordination disorders, while at the same time, the boy's brain was like a supercomputer. Kim developed his own reading technique, in which he read the right page with his right eye and the left page with his left eye at the same time. He stored the contents of thousands of books in his memory and could remember 98% of what he read. At the age of 7, he knew the Bible by heart, and later he could name the dates of all important events in the world, as well as the birth and death dates of famous people. He knew all the long-distance telephone and zone improvement plan codes in the United States, and memorized maps of all major and medium-sized American cities. By reading and memorizing maps, he could indicate routes through a huge number of cities with astonishing accuracy. Kim performed calendar calculations that other people couldn't do, and memorized musical compositions by sheet music. Later, he also developed piano-playing skills. By the age of 53, he had memorized more than 7,000 books by heart, most of which were reference books and statistical tables with a huge amount of information. Despite a large number of tests and studies, scientists were never able to find the cause of the man's rare condition and talent. It is believed that Kim Pick had the best memory among his contemporaries on the planet. Well, now, after such different and shocking memory anomalies, it's time to talk about the contents of the skull, in one of the corners of which, in theory, this very memory should be located. The brain is a vital organ. Even minor damage to it can cause serious harm to a person, leading to loss of consciousness, amnesia, or mental disorders. But what if all this isn't quite true? Let's look at the facts that contradict the generally accepted scientific point of view. Not long ago, in the Moscow region, the Shimachevsky disaster, the attack on... A person feels unwell, but at the same time, there are no irreversible consequences for the body. The cause of this phenomenon is most often a disruption of blood circulation in the brain. That's why neurologist Marina Anakina explains that the man was immediately given a computed tomography scan, which is the main test in this situation. But the results of the computed tomography scan shocked the doctors. The ischemic attack in the patient should have occurred in the left hemisphere of the brain, but in the image, this hemisphere was completely absent. This was not the result of an injury, illness, or anything else. The person had lived without half of his brain since birth, and it didn't stop him from getting a higher education or starting a family. And for the first time, he experienced heart and brain problems only at an almost old age. At 60, moreover, when his motor functions recovered, he calmly went home. You've probably seen the meme featuring an image of an almost empty brain, but what's surprising is that it actually has a real-life prototype. In fact, it's an image of a 44-year-old man from France. The doctors did not reveal his identity, but in 2007 they published a study that really blew the minds of the medical community. So, what happened? The man came to the clinic complaining of weakness in his left leg. Naturally, they connected it to his brain, but no one suspected that the man's head was 90% filled with fluid, and there were no hemispheres left, just a small piece about 10% of the original size. And what do you think happened? The man's intelligence quotient was 75, and this didn't stop him from working as a civil servant without any problems. It makes you want to do a magnetic resonance imaging scan on all our officials, just to see how many % they have left in there. But then again, it's not just the officials, is it? Apparently, you can not only live without a brain, but also attend concerts. People like that exist. But jokes aside, and there have been a lot of such cases recorded, and the most amazing ones are still to come. But the main question is, how did science explain these cases? Neuroplasticity? That's exactly the beautiful word used to explain such cases. And it's not just about the remaining part of the brain taking over the functions of the missing or damaged part. It's also a term related to learning. The brain is not born ready. It actively interacts with the environment as it develops. First of all, this was evidenced by studies of so-called feral children, abandoned in the wild, who had never heard human speech. They were unable to acquire socially accepted behavior skills or develop their intellectual abilities to an adult level, remaining developmentally delayed for life. It soon became clear that the child's brain is plastic. This period of such malleability was called critical because it is impossible to make up for the lack of learning during this time later on. The neuropicture of the world changed completely when it was proven that the brain, while learning, is capable of growing even in adults. A classic example confirming the validity of this statement is the results obtained in a series of studies on London taxi drivers. The drivers memorized detailed maps of the huge city to pass the exam. The more the subject knew, the larger their hippocampus was, the area responsible for memory. Thus, modern science has come to the final conclusion that the brain is capable of changing throughout life. And if it changes throughout life, then learning is its natural and permanent state. So, neuroplasticity. It seems clear now, that's exactly what can explain all these strange cases. For example, like with Carlos Rodriguez, who went viral on the internet in 2010 while being intoxicated. He crashed in every possible way and literally lost half of his head. And yet, he's alive and happy, almost as if they just removed some kind of vestigial organ. And here's another exotic case. Anatoly Petrovich Bugorsky, a gifted Russian scientist. His specialty is particle physics, and in the 1970s he worked at the largest Soviet collider. One time, the safety system mechanism of the U-70 accelerator malfunctioned, and as a result, the researcher was struck by a beam of protons. As a result, he lost hearing in his left ear, suffered partial facial paralysis, and experiences periodic epileptic seizures. But nevertheless, he successfully completed his dissertation and continues his scientific work. Even such futuristic injuries were survived by the human body. In 2002, a girl from the Netherlands survived a major surgery. Her left hemisphere of the brain was removed, which is still believed to contain the speech centers. Today, this child amazes doctors by mastering 2 languages and studying a third. Dr. Johannes Borgstein, who is observing the little Dutch girl, says that he has already advised his students to forget all the neurophysiological theories they have studied and will study in the future. In 1940, Dr. Augusto Iturrico, in his report at a meeting of the Bolivian Anthropological Society, spoke about a 14-year-old boy who was in his clinic diagnosed with a brain tumor. The patient remained conscious and in sound mind until his death, only complaining of severe headaches. During the autopsy, the doctors were extremely astonished. The entire brain mass was separated from the inner cavity of the skull, and blood did not have access to it. In other words, the boy simply had no brain. So much for neuroplasticity. For the doctors, the normal functioning of the boy's consciousness remained a mystery. Now is the perfect time to see what statements the world's leading scientists are making about this. Dr. Semparnia from the Central Clinic of Southampton says, "The brain, like any other organ of the human body, is made up of cells and is not capable of thinking. However, it can function as a primary detector of thoughts, like a television receiver that first picks up incoming waves and then converts them into sound and image." Peter Fenwick, his colleague from the London Institute of Psychiatry, makes an even bolder conclusion. Consciousness may very well continue to exist even after the physical death of the body. John Eccles, a leading contemporary neurophysiologist and Nobel laureate in medicine, also believes that the psyche is not a function of the brain. Together with neurosurgeon Welder Penfield, who performed more than 10,000 brain surgeries, Eccles wrote the book The Mystery of Man. In it, the authors state directly that they have no doubt that a human is controlled by something beyond his body. Professor Eccles writes, "I can experimentally confirm that the work of consciousness cannot be explained by the functioning of the brain. Consciousness exists independently of it, from outside." The other author of the book, Penfield, shares Eccles's opinion, and he adds to what was said that, as a result of many years of studying brain activity, he came to the conclusion that the energy of the mind is different from the energy of the brain's neural impulses. And here is a quote from the director of the Brain Research Institute, a world-renowned neurophysiologist, Professor Natalia Petrovna Bektereva. "The hypothesis that the human brain only receives thoughts from somewhere outside, I first heard from the Nobel laureate, Professor E. Kiki Klaus. Of course, at the time it seemed absurd to me, but later research conducted at our St. Petersburg Brain Research Institute confirmed that we cannot explain the mechanics of the creative process." Two more Nobel laureates, neurophysiologists David Hubel and Torsten Wiesel, have repeatedly stated in their speeches and scientific works that in order to assert a connection between the brain and consciousness, we need to understand what reads and decodes the information coming from the senses. However, as the scientists emphasize, this is impossible to do. The fact that consciousness exists independently of the brain is also confirmed by research recently conducted by Dutch physiologists led by Pim van Lommel. The results of the large-scale experiment were published in the highly respected English biological journal, The Lancet. Consciousness exists even after the brain has stopped functioning. In other words, consciousness lives on its own, independently. As for the brain, it is not thinking matter at all, but simply an organ like any other, performing certain functions. It is quite possible that thinking matter does not exist at all. In principle, stated the head of the research, the famous scientist Pim van Lommel. Let's sum up. All these cases, my friends, tell us that consciousness is not born in the brain. And here is another case, which in various forms you will most likely be able to read in the comments under the episode. Probably, every family has a story where a mother, from many kilometers away, feels what is happening to her child. What causes this connection? What are its physical signs? Share your thoughts and rate the episode so we know our efforts were not in vain. See you in new videos on our channel.